Yeah,
Yeah, the air
it's gonna be warm
conditioning in
here.
the sanctuary isn't on yet.
I was
Oh,
just
okay.
saying that,
Gonna be warm.
Denver last
Guess
week.
we'll have to keep my living out there.
Congratulations.
Thank
Mazel
you.
tov.
Get a fan.
Well, up until last week, everybody was freezing, so
I
this
know.
is good.
And next week it'll be chilly again, so. You can't.
11 people canceled, and then since Sunday, of the people who were there, 19.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's not good odds.
no, it's not.
Well, hopefully no more will test positive from.
Well, we're close to, I think, being safe.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
should be.
Seth said,
Not here.
give yourself till Saturday. Nothing happens by Saturday, you're sick. From that particular
Sure,
possible infection.
touches everything.
Yep. Marcia's not coming tonight?
No, they're Chicken Pink Island, they're the wedding, the Benderson wedding.
Oh, right, you did tell me that. That's right. And I'm trouble keeping track of my email. It's our daughter's birthday today, and she never said anything about getting together, and then when she did, she wanted to do tomorrow, but we've got Shays. So it's like, sorry. Then we said something about, we could cook, and they could come over on Sunday, and she said, no, that's our chill day. Whatever the heck that means.
How is the both of them working from home? Working
Good,
out?
I guess, the dog's happy. We've got her at the end of the month, Chris's official graduation. I mean, he graduated a while ago from his master's, but they never had the ceremony, so they're going to Boston to, so he can walk, and his parents are going. So we got nominated for the dog. So we've got the dog Thursday night, all day Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and most of Monday, Memorial Day weekend. And then I finished. I have to work on it. And I'm not giving that all that time and a half, so it's like. But she's fine. I just don't know what she's gonna be like. I guess so.
Where do you live?
Denver.
Hi.
She used to have a dog.
Hey, Judy.
Are you introducing? So we're gonna, so today, we'll do Mincha and Kabbalat Shabbat, and then it'll be time. I'll just say when it's time for you to come up. And then are we doing Q&A? Are we?
We can, depending on how long, obviously, over people here some more.
Okay. All right, well, so I mean,
Would you want to, I'm sorry, I'm Judy Graham.
so there you go.
Oh, you've spoken.
Yes.
Professor Ritzvan, Barbara Pearl.
Do you want to do your own handling of the Q&A?
What, you tell me what works best for you.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
I'm comfortable at calling out people, I'm comfortable not doing it.
You can do it, but at some point I may have to cover it.
No, I was gonna say, please do.
Yeah, we have the live stream going through 7:30, so that'll be our.
I think I bring a fan.
And you can let me know.
Yeah, where's the?
Like put it in the hall and have it pull the air from the hall into here.
I'll bring them though you were free, so be fine.
Just
Why don't you keep your jacket on?
We look very fine with
Whatever works.
I am putting on.
I gotta figure out what's the easiest thing.
The problem I get here is,
Stuff if you're juggling a lot of pieces.
we picked a week. Okay, last week was cold, we didn't have the heat last week, people. This week we're gonna have heat, we saw the heat in our air conditioning, next week it's gonna be chilly, you can't wait.
Well, we had, last year.
Tell you what, in school,
75.
people have been dropping down flies.
Really?
Yep, I couldn't get teachers.
We
I know
have
one.
bodies out, the list of emails comes out every morning about missing teachers and teaching assistants. Like 25
Bill
today.
got it, let's see. I think Tuesday was his testing day, and he was positive. Robert tested positive.
I saw him Monday, and he's like, he had like 5 or 8 kids missing from his class, and the kids were coughing up a storm. He was like, we got a bunch of bodies down, he said Monday, and then I didn't see him again. I was like, oh no. I hope not.
daughter and granddaughter have it.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I know Danny had it, she had it. So she had nothing. Yes.
I don't know, because it's just been moved throughout the whole
So
thing.
somebody who was there.
We are facing that way down. And then,
People where they keep testing negative,
this is east.
negative.
And then,
Welcome back.
and then when it's time,
I looked for you last week, but
it's okay.
Rabbi said you should go to the other conservative.
So, so this is Judy. Judy's son is Seth Davis, who's a past president of the Educational Alliance. So, yeah.
We did meet before.
Yes, we did, yeah.
I
Last
wasn't
week I
sure,
couldn't remember, I was like, oh dear, I was like, I felt
but I didn't
that
see
we
anything
really
that
had nine.
said to
So you were in there.
we had our granddaughter last.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
Congratulations.
thank you. The last one.
No, that's good to hear. And did you, have you met you probably haven't met the Broomwall.
Oh, yeah, we've known her for many years. And
Yeah, he's
his
very.
wife, Melanie,
You got it
and
covered, you okay?
Seth, my son.
All right, I'm just gonna throw on my,
So when they came to Denver, it was an automatic, hi, how are you? Nice to see you again, kind of thing. So that was great, yeah. And of course, you know, when the winter they're very difficult. And the cantorial soloist was there Saturday morning for the first time. You're not from Denver. Okay, well, he was there. It was his first Shabbat. And the energy that there was in that sanctuary was unbelievable. And so nice. It was
Get to the hospital, well.
Rabbi Dallin was there, and he
10:30.
sort of
Did
sat
your PET scan
beside
until
him.
1, at 4 o'clock, we
Said
still
Mazel
had
Tov
to
to
see the doctor
Aviva,
or
and that was about it.
So I get up and I said, if you have a bleeding in the brain, you can stay like.
Well, he's officially not retired until October.
The nurse didn't like that. They visit, it was like a Zoom.
Yeah.
At 4:30, they told us, oh, it's a clean happy day.
Holidays are
Well, I
end of
figured that
September.
one out.
Oh my goodness. What hospital was that?
It was,
Sounds like Buffalo General.
no,
And they were honoring him, they were honoring everybody who was retiring.
Uh,
Friend of mine,
Like five
Buffalo
months.
General.
He wasn't there.
They're like, we're generally.
Really?
We were just kind of, I don't know, just the
And I
alliance.
said, so if it's an emergency, I said, where should we go?
Really?
And they were like, go to Sisters of
he's
Mercy.
not happy.
well, he came in an ambulance, so he wasn't in the waiting room ever. They took him right to the back. They were in the back.
It is too bad, but some of it is
Yeah, right. It's
Until
tough.
6 a.m.
that
Oh,
leads you on a path.
We know him.
Yeah, my sister.
We lived in Denver before. And then we were with the things, and we were doing
Got it. But I,
Well, I was just really beloved rabbi.
Yeah, that was
Who was beloved of the whole community. So that's a hard act to follow.
it is.
And he's totally like personality.
They looked at the temple. They weren't married yet. They wanted to find their religious home. And they settled on AGA. And they loved it. Rabbi Dallin and Goldstein married them. And we'd go in for a weekend, and either one of them would come up to me and say, oh, it's wonderful to see you here, Judy.
And how is
You know my name.
your husband?
So we felt as we got married
Good.
with them and with the synagogue plus Sunday.
Well, I'm just pressing for 2 years.
The first year we went for Yom Kippur.
5:30 in the morning. Walking about
Yeah.
That whole overnight, that's such a pain.
But changes in the air.
So we got him at 6 a.m.
That's the point of the weekend.
better than last week.
Here, take these, and I'll get another one. You're welcome.
That's okay. No, he hated it. You know, obviously, I'm the eldest. Yeah, he left me back.
The new life.
I don't know if you do it, but I know lots of people who sort of go, I can't say synagogue shopping because they're not going to buy, but they go all over the country. So we can mention services, lots of places. Have you tried that at all? It's visiting synagogues, the West Coast, the East Coast, North South.
Oh, you mean on?
On Zoom? Well, on live stream, you can't get it on Zoom. Yeah. Wonder sometimes what the effect of the pandemic will be long term. Is everybody going to go on? I don't know. We discussed live streaming. Our congregation was, before the pandemic, they were discussing for people who can't drive.
Right, yeah.
And there was a big debate. The debate got resolved by the pandemic. End of discussion.
It's not the same. My opinion, it's not like being.
No, it is not close.
Just the atmosphere that you're in, sitting in a chair or wherever, watching, I don't know. It's not participatory, I don't know, it's not the same.
We had that first experience. We were looking for a congregation at our holidays weather, and we heard there was this one congregation in New York that did it. So that year we watched. There's always the question when they say please sing along, do you or don't you? So at least we had that experience, but then we joined the congregation for the most of it. Very different experience. Where do we go?
All right. Yeah, by the beer.
2 to 6.
Still got a few? So where are we doing? I don't have a watch, so
It's 2
I
o'clock.
have 4.
Oh, she's probably right.
I can't set mine faster.
Right, right.
Mine's accurate.
It's you know, AST, Alpha Standard Time. So,
Has Verdict changed to?
Yes.
Which one? Do you like
We're
it?
showing, so, I find it difficult.
We should talk more. I'll talk more about it because there are people who want to change it.
Well, part of the reason I get completely distracted by all day commentary. So that's one thing.
Well, they're responding to Art Scroll.
See, I told you.
It looks just like the new reform one.
Yeah,
So they're all doing it.
and there's something heavy.
Yes, they're awful.
Yeah.
They didn't learn, which was it?
The Mopsor was heavier than the previous.
And that's why they had to redo it on like a paper. I can't remember the whole story. Why they didn't learn from that makes no sense.
Oh, and now they're working on a weekday one. Don't get me started on that. I got a whole thing on that.
Is there discussion?
Nothing full. Nothing full. They would have only
That's okay.
all very good then. We had to go, we ate well. All good. Thank God. Not that time? Not that time? Okay.
Tzaraim Tovim, good afternoon. Welcome to Temple Beth Tzedek. We are glad to have you here. We're glad to have people watching
on the live stream. We look forward, of course, to kicking off the Klein Weekend. But before we do that, we have an opportunity to worship. We'll do the Friday afternoon service, Mincha. If you have the Shabbat Siddur, we will start on page 1.
Ashrei Ashrei V'techa Od Yalalucha Selah. תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו ויברך כל בשר שם קדשו לעולם ועד ואנחנו נברך יה מעתה ועד עולם הללויה. יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה ועלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי וחייכנו ויומכנו וחייך על בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבו מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא יתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמא ואמרו.
Please rise. Our leader will recite aloud pages 3a and 4, the beginning of the Mincha Amidah. The individual portion goes through page 9.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasodim Tovim, ve'Konei HaKol, v'Zocher Chastei Avot, ומביא גואל לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדום מלך, מלך מימית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. נקדש את שמך בעולם כשם שמקדישים אותו בשמי מרום, ככתוב על יד נביאך וקרא זה אל זה ואמר. קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלך הארץ כבודו, לעומתם ברוך יאמרו. ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו, ובדברי קודשך כתוב לאמור. ימלוך אדוני לעולם אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור הללויה. לדור ודור נגיד גודלך, ולנצח נצחים קדושות בך נקדיש. שבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש לעולם ועד, כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Feel free to continue if you're still reciting the Amidah. Kaddish Shalem is on page 10, followed by Aleinu on page 11.
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבו, ועלמא דברך ירתה וימליך מלכותה, וחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו. יהי שמי רבו מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תמירן בעלמא ואמרו. תתקבל צלותהון ובאותהון דכל ישראל, קדם אבוהון דבשמיא ואמרו. יהי שלום רבו מן שמיא, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה. שלא עשינו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו, וגר עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
For those in mourning and those observing Yartzeit, Mourner's Kaddish, page 12. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemeh rabam, v'yalma divra kiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru, amen. Yehi shmeh rabam v'orach le'alam u'valmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmeh dekudsha brichu, Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran bi'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Please be seated. We will now commence with our Shabbat worship, with the Kabbalat Shabbat service beginning on page 14, Yedid Nefesh.
Yedid Nefesh, Av Harachaman, Mishoch Avdoch, El Retzonach, Yarutz Avdach, Kemo Ayal, Yishtachave el mul hadarach, Yerav lo yedidutach, Mino fetzuf v'chol toam, Hadur na'eh, Ziv ha'olam, Nafshi cholat avatach, Ana elena refana la behar otla naam zivach as tit chazek v'tit rape v'ha'etalach shivchat olam v'tik yemu rachamecha v'chusna al beino havach, ki ze kama nichsof, lir'ot b'tiferet uzach, anai li machmad libi, chul shana ve'al tid alam higalena, ופרוס חביב עלי את סוכת שלומך, תאיר ארץ מכבודך, נגילה ונשמחה בך, מהר אהוב כי במועד, וכהנני כי מעולם. יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי לי לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי לי לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, יאללה לי 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 לי, yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la, yalla la 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 la.
Pages 15 and 16.
Lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena l'Adonai, lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzur yishenu, nekadma fanav betoida. Naria, naria, letzur yishenu, bizmirot naria lo. Lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena l'Adonai, lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena, lechu neran lena l'Adonai. Arbaim shana kud bedor va'omaram to'e levavhem vehem lo yaru derachai asher nishbati ve'api im yavon el menuchati. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruchu shemo, basru miyom liyom yeshuato, sapru bagoyim kevodo, bechol ha'amim nifleotav, ki gadol Adonai, Umhulal me'or norahu al kol Elohim lai 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 ki kol Elohei ho'amim elilim v'Adonai shamayim asa hod v'hadar lefanav oz v'tiferet b'mikdasho havu l'Adonai mishpechot amim havu l'Adonai kavod va'oz havu l'Adonai kevod shemo Se'o mincha uva'u lechatzrotav lai 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 hishtachavu l'Adonai behadrat kodesh chilu mipano v'kol ha'aretz imru v'goyim Adonai molach avti kontevel balatimot yadin amim b'meishorim yismichu hashamayim v'togel ha'aretz Yer am hayam lo yalo sodai bechol asher bo lai 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 oz yeranenu kol atzeyor lifnei Adonai kiva lishpot haaretz yishpot tevel b'tzedek ve'amim be'emunato lai 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 lai.
Continue with the Psalms, pages 17 through 19.
Or zaru ala tzadik ul yishrele v'simcha, simchu tzadikim baronai, v'hodu lezecher kodsho. Mizmor shiru ladonai, shir chadash, ki niflaot asa, Hoshia lo yemino, Uzra kodsho hodia Adonai Yeshuato, le'enei hagoyim gilot tzidkato, Zochar chasto ve'emunato, Levei Yisrael ra'u kol afsei haaretz, Et Yeshuat Eloheinu, Hariyu l'Adonai, Kol haaretz, Pitzchu v'ranenu v'zameru, Zamru l'Adonai b'chinor, B'chinor v'kol zimra, B'chatzot rot v'kol shofar, Hariyu lifnei hamelech Adonai, Yiram hayam u'melo'o, Tevel v'yosh v'va, Neharo imcha uchaf, Yachal harim yeranenu, Lifnei Adonai kiva, Kiva lishpot haaretz, Yishpot tevel betzedek, Ve'amim b'meishorim, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai, Lai 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 lai. Ramamu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu lahar kadosho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu.
Please rise, page 20.
Mizmor leDavid, havu l'Adonai ben Elim, havu l'Adonai, kavod va'oz, lai lai lai, havu l'Adonai kevod shemo, shtachavu l'Adonai b'hadrat kodesh, Kol Adonai al hamayim, el hakovod hirim, Adonai al mayim rabim, Kol Adonai bakoach, lai lai lai, Kol Adonai behador, Kol Adonai shover arazim, Vaishaber Adonai et arzei halvanon vayar. Moegel Levanon Vesirion Kemo ven re'imim lai lai lai, Kol Adonai chotzev lahavot eish, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kadesh, Kol Adonai yecholel vayechesov ye'arok ubhechalot kulo omer kavod lai lai lai, Adonai lama bul yosho vayeshev, Adonai melech, Adonai oz le'amo yitein, Adonai yevorech et amo v'shalom, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai, lai 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 lai.
May be seated. Continue on pages 21 and 22 for Lecha Dodi. At the final stanza, we will rise and face the entrance of whatever room we are in order to welcome Shabbat into our hearts. We'll start on page 21.
Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachar b'dibor echad, ishmi anu el hamiyuchar Adonai echad, ushma echad, l'shem ultiferet v'letila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lecho v'nelcha, ki mekor habracha merosh mikedem, nesucha sof ma'aseh v'machshavot techila. Lecha dodi likrat kavala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech ir melucha, kum mitzei mitoicha hafecha rabelach shever, ba'emek habocha v'hu yachamol alayichem ela. Lecha dodi likrat kavala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Hitna ari me'ofor kumi, livshi bigdei tifartecha mi al yad ben Yishai, beit halach mi korva el nafshi geyala. Lecha dodi likrat kavala, pene Shabbat. Hit orari, kiva orech, kumi uri, shir daberi, kavod Adonai, alayich nigala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Lo tevoshi velo tikolmi, matish tochachi umatemi bach yechesu aniye ami venivneta ir altila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat. V'hayulim shisa shoy soyich barocha kukal mevalayich yasis alayich Elohayich kimsos chatan alakala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Yamin usmol tiyefrotzi v'yet Adonai tavaritzi al yad ish ben partzi v'nismecha v'nagila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela. Bo'i v'shalom ateres bala, gam b'simcha u'v'tzala, toch emune am segula. Bo'i chala, lecha dodi likrat kala, pene Shabbat nekabela.
You may be seated, pages 23 and 24.
Tzadik hatamar yifrach, ke'erez balavanon yisgeh, shetulim beveit Adonai, bechatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu. Od yenuvon beseva, deshenim verananim yiyu lehagir ki yashar Adonai tzuri v'lo avla tabo. עדותיך נאמנו מאוד, לביתך נאווה קודש, אדוני לאורך ימים.
Mourner's Kaddish for those in mourning, those observing yard site, middle of page 24. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemeh rabba, v'yalma divra kiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehi shmeh rabba mevorach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yithalal shmei d'kudsha b'richu la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. You may be seated. It is a pleasure to, at this time, begin the first Klein Scholar in Residence Weekend in person in 3 years. I want to make sure that that milestone is appreciated. And I certainly look forward to learning from our scholar throughout this weekend to make a formal introduction, and with gratitude toward her constant work for adult education as one of our co-chairs of the Adult Education Committee, Judy Brownstein.
Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Judy Katzenelson-Brownstein, and together with Fern Bernstein, I co-chair the Adult Education Committee here at Temple Beth Tzedek. The main event of our year is the Rabbi Isaac Klein Scholar in Residence program. And as the rabbi mentioned, because of COVID, we've had to make changes. We didn't have it one year, and then the next year we did it over 4 Saturday evenings, all of it webinars. So this year we're doing our first hybrid presentation, which is live streamed all weekend and in person. And we have as our guest speaker, Dr. Frederick E. Greenspan, Gimelstob Eminent Scholar of Judaic Studies at Florida Atlantic University. Dr. Greenspan earned his doctorate in biblical studies at Brandeis University, his MA from the Hebrew Letter at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and his BA in philosophy from the University of California at Santa Cruz. Dr. Greenspan has written and edited 16 books, including An Introduction to Aramaic, When Brothers Dwell Together, The Preeminence of Younger Siblings in the Hebrew Bible, as well as several books on interfaith relations. He is currently editor of the NYU Press series Jewish Studies in the 21st Century. Prior to assuming his role at FAU in 2004, he directed the University of Denver's academic program in Judaic Studies and served as chair of its Department of Religious Studies. He was also elected to honorary membership in Phi Beta Kappa in 1991 and received the United Methodist Church's University Scholar Teacher Award in 1995. Throughout his career, Dr. Greenspan has been an editor and advisor for a range of academic journals and publications, including the National Association of Professors of Hebrew and its journal, Hebrew Studies. He was also an advisor for the Jewish Publication Society's Guide to the Jewish Bible and served on the editorial boards of the Journal of Reform Judaism and the Journal of Biblical Literature, as well as the boards of the Association for Jewish Studies, the Society of Biblical Literature, and the Academic Advisory Board of Hebrew Union College of Jewish Institute of Religion. The overarching theme of Dr. Greenspan's presentations this weekend will be on the changing nature of American Jewry. On Friday night, tonight, we will cover institutions, followed by ethnicity tomorrow morning, gender on Saturday evening, and then religion on Sunday morning. I'm also asking you that if you would like, we would very much appreciate donations to support the Klein series. You can do this after Shabbat. You can, send checks into the office or do it online. And now I'd like to introduce you to Professor Greenspan.
Thank you very much. Can you all understand me? Okay. I have to confess, it's a pleasure to be able to see people in person, but this is the first time, as you can imagine, in many years that I've been in front of an actual audience as opposed to a computer screen, so it's new for all of us. And it's a wonderful opportunity to be here for any number of reasons. I can tell you that we have watched your services many times and benefited immensely from that. And also it's been a delight, of course, to be able to visit and look forward to meeting many of you. In 1969, 47 professors of Judaica gathered at the Harvard Faculty Club to create an organization. There were these random professors who had been scattered at several institutions, mostly in the Northeast, who felt that the time had come to get together and discuss and share their research, their discoveries, their understandings of Judaism and its history. And so they created an organization known as the Association for Jewish Studies, all 47 of them. Last year, my wife and I attended their conference, and I am pleased to inform you that they now have over 2,000 members, from 47 in 1969 to something in the nature of 2,000 in 2021. That makes the Association for Jewish Studies, the organization of professors of Judaica at colleges and universities in the United States, roughly equivalent in size to the Rabbinical Assembly of the conservative movement, roughly equivalent in size to the membership of the Reform Movement Central Conference of American Rabbis. These are people, again, who are professors. They are not, for the most part, trained as rabbis. And each year they have a conference scattered in different places over the United States, at which they usually attract 5 to 6 times as many attendees as ever attend the RA or the CCR member organizations and their conferences. This is a huge change that has taken place over 50 years with an organization largely unrecognized by the larger Jewish world, but something that has happened in our lifetime. And as such, it reflects the explosion of academic Jewish studies in the United States and frankly around the world, because there are similar groups in Britain, in Canada. There's a World Union that meets every 4 years in Israel. There's a group that meets in Germany. Something dramatic has happened over the last generation. But equally important is recognizing not simply the size of this group, but also the fact that the vast majority of these scholars are not located in Jewish institutions. They're not in seminaries, they're not in colleges of Jewish education, they're in secular institutions. Just to give you an example, which I hope will sound vaguely familiar, the University at Buffalo has a Department of Jewish Thought in Buffalo, okay, with 4 faculty members. Moreover, if you look at those 4 faculty members and say, well, where did they come from? Where were they trained? It was not the Jewish Theological Seminary. It was not the Hebrew University. It was not the Hebrew Union College or Yeshiva University. Those 4 faculty members were trained at Stanford, Stony Brook, Toronto, and the University of Chicago. Think about that. In our lifetime, what has happened? Not only is there a Jewish studies program at the University of Buffalo and comparable universities across the country, but the training didn't come at Jewish institutions. It came at secular institutions, in their departments of history or literature or Middle East studies, whatever it might happen to be. In other words, we are living in a time when Judaic scholarship is vibrant. It has exploded. It's everywhere. But at the same time, it's not centralized. There isn't one institution you go to be trained. You can go to hundreds of different institutions. And at the same time that has taken place, these people are trained in non-Jewish settings. Their PhDs will come from a department of literature, a department of history, a department of film studies, whatever it might be. That's a dramatic change. These people are specialists in a whole array of topics, political science, whatever it might happen to be. But they aren't necessarily trained the same way that those 647 professors who gathered a generation ago were trained. And one of the things that has concerned me throughout my career has been the fact that with this explosion of Jewish studies, a lot of the scholarship that is taken place, the ideas that have been developed, the learning that we have acquired, isn't reaching the Jewish community. I've noticed it, just to give an example, in Denver, Colorado, where we live, or in Florida, where we lived before. And when the congregations would bring professors to talk about subjects, to be scholars in residence, as you have done, usually they brought somebody from a seminary or a Hebrew college. But they were overlooking this vast group of people who are much, much larger than the faculties of the seminaries, I don't need to tell you that, and trained in very different ways with vast contributions to our understanding of Jewish life and the Jewish world. And so I set out to bridge that gap. That was my goal, and has been for quite some time. And so I was able to create a series of books which we call Jewish Studies in the 21st Century. Published, no, not by the Jewish Theological Seminary, not by Hebrew College, but by New York University Press, which understandably NYU has its own Jewish studies program with very prominent scholars. And my goal was to identify those topics which I think the community needed to know about, the ideas that were circulating, the discoveries that were being made, and share them with a large Jewish audience. So we went out to try to find the very best scholars in what we thought were key fields who could describe recent understandings that we thought were not getting sufficient recognition. So we started with Bible, A, because that's where Judaism starts, and B, because it happens to be my field of specialization, so I knew it best. But then we brought in people to explore and describe what we know about Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. And after that, Israel. And then women in Judaism. And most recently, the origins of Jewish religion. And I brought cards if you want to see what those books look like. They're out in the lobby, and you can explore them. But when it came time to think of a new volume and to say, what should we do next? And when NYU said to me, yes, you're leaving Florida, but you can't stop, it seemed pretty obvious to me that the topic that has been ignored and has not reached the broader audience was what's going on right here in America, what I'm calling the state of American Jewry. Because in our lifetimes, the nature of American Jewry has changed dramatically. But because we live with it, we oftentimes don't even realize. It's like watching a plant grow. You don't see it change from day to day. And yet a year from now, it looks very different than it did when you put that seed in the ground. And so I sought out experts in all the relevant fields. And what I'd like to do over this weekend is share with you what they have taught me. So let me stress, I am not an expert in American Jewry, though I am a very interested observer and participant in that. But I have learned a great deal from these people and their insights, and it's that which I would like to describe with you over this weekend. So today we're going to talk about organizations, or what one of my colleagues speaks of, the infrastructure of the American Jewish community, the things we all take for granted, but don't often reflect upon. Then tomorrow morning, race and ethnicity, because that too has changed dramatically. Tomorrow afternoon, gender. And finally, I'll get to the topic that's always comes first to our minds, and that is on Sunday morning, religion. Because yes, even the Jewish religion has changed over the last generation. To give you a sense of how significant this is, I want to come back to the topic of Judaic scholarship, because I mentioned how it has exploded at secular institutions. And that has had a huge impact, even within the last couple of months. It was announced, I think less than a month ago, that the Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary in Cincinnati, is reevaluating whether it should continue offering a doctoral program. Okay, this is a place which has trained a century, essentially, of scholars in Judaica, and they're not sure they want to continue that. And the reason they gave, to a great outpouring of anger, frankly, among their alumni, is that why are we doing this when there's some 200 programs around the country that are doing the same thing? When we started out, we were the only ones, or so they said. But now, why compete with 200 other programs? What's the point? There's no need for us. I don't know what they will decide, but that's the issue that they raised, that the nature of Judaic scholarship has changed. The location of it has changed so significantly that they're not sure there's a place for them to continue doing that at all. And I'd like to suggest that in many ways that issue can serve as a parable for what's been going on in Jewish life in America in general. That things are changing, and the institutions and the structures that were put in place over the last century are changing to reflect that. Think, if you would, of rabbinical schools. If you want to hire a rabbi, where do you go? If you're a conservative congregation, I'm sure you all know this, you go to the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. It's obvious. Except now it turns out you could also go to the Ziegler School in Los Angeles, or you could go to Machon Schechter in Jerusalem. No longer is it obvious that you go to JTS. You now have a choice. Similarly, if you're a Reform congregation, you would go to the Hebrew Union College, which initially had its campus in Cincinnati, then in the 50s merged with another school and has a campus in New York. But now they have two other campuses, again in Los Angeles and Jerusalem. Or if you're Orthodox, modern Orthodox, normally you would have gone to Yeshiva University and their rabbinical program, or maybe to the Hebrew Theological College in Chicago. But now, there's Yeshivat Chovevei Torah in New York, and even Yeshivat Maharat, which I will talk about tomorrow. Or, if you're not happy with Orthodox, Conservative, or Reform, they're the Reconstructionists in Philadelphia. They have a seminary as well that started in 1981. But then again, who cares about denominations? Maybe I don't care that my rabbi was ordained at the same place as his predecessor. So there are non-denominational seminaries that have cropped up. There's the Academy for Jewish Religion, which has campuses in New York and Los Angeles. There's Hebrew College in Boston. Aleph, which is sort of a mystical kind of a non-denominational program that is centered in Philadelphia but trains a lot of its people through online programming. And I haven't even begun to talk about Chabad or the various online programs that now exist. Things have changed. They've changed dramatically, and they've changed in our lifetimes. And that is simply a parable for what's gone on throughout the organized Jewish world. At the same time, as you would imagine, with this proliferation of rabbinical programs, what has happened to the main denominations? Well, guess what? They've had to cut back because they aren't attracting the same number of people. So, for example, the Union for Reform Judaism some years ago had to close all its regional offices. People weren't happy about that around the country, but they simply couldn't sustain them. And now they have voted to close the rabbinical program in Cincinnati. The Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism now have one CEO that they share instead of being two separate organizations. Same thing has happened with the Reconstructionists. Their rabbinical organization, their congregational arm and their seminary are now jointly run. So on the one hand, we have this proliferation of organizations, and on the other hand, we're seeing some consolidation within the established groups. At the same time, however, before we all lament this development, numerous non-denominational groups have emerged, not just seminaries, but congregations and other organizations. So for example, there's Machon Hadar in New York, Ikar in Los Angeles, Judaism Your Way in Denver, Colorado. I always find that title rather stunning, Judaism Your Way, for a religion that has 613 commandments, sort of announcing, well, pick and choose, do it however you want. And lest you think that this is limited to religious organizations, rabbinic organizations, congregational groups, and the like, it's gone well beyond that. There is a plethora of organizations that are not devoted to specifically religious functions that have emerged. I started by mentioning the Association for Jewish Studies. It's not denominational, it's not religious, it's academic. We all think of college campuses as being dominated by Hillel, but now there are a variety of other organizations for students on college campuses. There's one called Judaism on Our Own Terms, which is on several campuses. Another called Stand With Us, Im Tirtzu, and of course, everywhere, Chabad. So if you're a student on a college campus, you can choose which building you're going to go to, which program you'll participate in. Where we were all used to the pro-Israel organization AIPAC, there are others now too. There's the New Israel Fund, J Street, the Jewish Voice for Peace, the Zionist Organization of America, Amenu. It'd be inconceivable for any of us to try to belong to all of those. And so you have to pick and choose the one that is closest to your approach. If you want to contribute to world events in some way through a Jewish vehicle, there's the American Jewish World Service. If you're interested in social justice, there's Tru'ah and Bend the Ark. There's the Shalom Center. There's the National Jewish Healing Center. If you care about environmental causes, there's Chazon. If you're a young Jew in their 20s or early 30s, there are 60 Moishe houses scattered around the country. If you're a ethnically diverse Jew, there's Kulanu and B'chol Lashon. If you're gay, there's Keshet. There's the Institute for the Next Jewish Future. There's a group called a Traditionally Radical Yeshiva. I'm not quite sure what that means, but it is called Savara. If you want to look up Jewish sources, you don't have to go to Barnes & Noble or whatever your local bookstore happens to be. You don't have to go to the Jewish bookstore. You can go online to Sefaria. There are magazines that didn't exist a generation ago. Lilith, Tablet, Jewish Currents. There's an organization, I would encourage you to look online because I couldn't get my head around what exactly it stands for, called Jewrotica. Okay, we can speculate based on the name, but go look online and see what this is. And then there are organizations set up to support various Jewish activities. There's the Hartman Institute, the Melton Institute. There are donors who are giving huge amounts of money through their foundations. The Jim Joseph Foundation, the Schusterman Foundation, the Mandel Foundation, the Crown Foundation, the Nathan Cumming Foundation. Think about all of that. It's hard to say anything is dying when there's so much being born, when things are changing so dramatically and in such a less centralized way. And that has consequences locally as well. When I grew up, if you wanted to support Jewish causes, you wrote a check to the Federation. What's happened increasingly is people are now giving directly to those causes and organizations they care about. So there's the Friends of Tel Aviv University, the Friends of Hadassah Hospital, the Friends of National Jewish, the Friends of this, the Friends of that. It goes on and on and on. Overseas causes and local causes. And then, as I said, there are the private foundations, which are doing immense things. We're all familiar with the Birthright program. That wasn't started by a Jewish organization. That was started by the Bronfman and Steinhardt families and their foundations. So it's hard to say things are bad, but they are confusing. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, what my colleague calls Jewish infrastructure, the organizational structure that we all take for granted, is changing and is becoming weakened. At the same time that these new organizations are sprouting out, the old organizations which had a monopoly on producing reform rabbis or collecting money or supporting Israel are now not as strong because people can do these things in a variety of different ways. And it's easy to look at this and become very despondent. It's easy to see this as a cause for despair. And it reminds me of a famous essay that was written in the mid-'80s, which described us, the Jewish people, as the ever-dying people. What he pointed out was we have a history, a 3,000-year history, of being convinced that our generation is the last. That's not something we feel today alone. It's something our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our ancestors thought. You can go all the way back to the Bible. Jews have always been convinced that their generation would be the last generation. And guess what? We're still here. We have survived. But what we need to recognize is that these changes are not a sign of disaster. The emergence of new approaches and new organizations are actually a sign of vitality, that people care. They may not like the old way, they want to find a new way. But nothing's going away, just it's emerging in new forms. And so yes, people are becoming Jewish, are behaving Jewishly differently, but that's not new. If you read the Talmud, if you read the way we do Judaism, it's not the way the Bible says. Last time I checked, you have a rabbi, not a priest, running the organization. And if you observe Passover, I doubt if I took a survey, there's a single person in this room who killed a lamb. The Bible says no, you have to kill a lamb and eat it all that night. We have always been changing, and we have always been convinced that we are dying. And 3,000 years later, here we are. Just to give you one example, this year is a very special year in Jewish memory. It was exactly 100 years ago, in 1922, that the first bat mitzvah took place in America. In other words, we've been through, 2,900 years without any banot mitzvah. It started 100 years ago, the first time. That was a radical change then. People didn't know quite what to make of it. I remember my bar mitzvah class in a large, very liberal congregation on the West Coast, of course, where all radicals start. And we had 5 girls in that class of 25 students. And that was considered dramatic. I doubt there was another synagogue in that city that had 5 girls. Most of them probably had none. And yet now, everybody does it. Even Orthodox Jews celebrate banot mitzvah. In 100 years, that's where we've come. In my lifetime, even Orthodox congregations that I would have once said never will do it are having Benot Mitzvah. I don't know about you, but I've attended some. It happens. It's real, and it's everywhere. Change is a constant. Similarly, what's happened in Jewish studies. As I said before, there are something over 200 programs around the country, everywhere, in large cities, in smaller cities, at the University of Buffalo, in rural colleges. Jewish studies is everywhere. And again, let me contrast that with the experience I had growing up. I remember when I was in high school, and I was talking to the guidance counselor as I was preparing to graduate, where was I going to go to college? And the guidance counselor, trying to make suggestions, said, I grew up in California. They said, there's one place you shouldn't apply. Stay away from Stanford. Because Stanford had a history of anti-Semitism. They didn't say it to me in those words, but that was clearly the point. And yet, as I began my work on putting this book together, as I looked for scholars who could address the contemporary American Jewish scene, I discovered there is a major Jewish studies program, guess where? Stanford University, of all places. Stanford University Press even publishes books on Jewish studies. Just in my lifetime, a place that we should avoid has become a place we should go. And Stanford University isn't the only press with a distinguished series of books on Judaica. State University of Indiana, of New York, of Washington, as well as Yale and the University of Chicago, all are producing Judaica in their publication series. So to bring this together, if I can quote a very famous Jewish Nobel Prize winner, the times they are a-changin'. And what I want to do with you this weekend is explore those changes, the changes that are taking place in the American Jewish world as it has been discussed and described by the scholars with whom I have interacted. So we will talk first tomorrow morning, as I said, about ethnicity, then tomorrow afternoon about gender, and finally on Sunday morning, changes in Jewish religion. But I hope you will keep in mind as we talk about this, that as unfamiliar as some of these developments may feel, as uncomfortable sometimes they may make us feel, and they make me feel it lots of times, it's not a horrible thing. It's a sign of evolution. It's a sign not of catastrophe, but of a community and a tradition that's alive and adapting and growing. It's an exciting time to be alive, and we can look at it with happiness and pride, curiosity, and yes, a bit of discomfort.
Professor Gitzwad, I think we have time for a question or two, if people have them. I don't think we have time for much more. Yeah, let's see. Just if anyone has a question right now, obviously, Professor Greenstone will be around the entire weekend, so if you want to, catch him casually, that's fine. But if anybody just has any time for maybe one or two questions. And of course, nobody wants to be the first.
To your right.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes. You mean as students? Yes. In fact, the president of the Association for Jewish Studies, about 5 years ago, I think, was not Jewish. And I recall, because she came to, it's a woman too, she contributed to one of the books that I put together on Jewish origins. She's an expert in the Talmud. Okay? Let me stress, there is no topic in Judaica that is harder and more difficult to get your head around than the Talmud. She's an expert. And I remember somebody, when we brought her to Florida, saying, how can you do that? And her response, I thought, was lovely. She said, You know, you don't have to be a triangle to teach geometry. And in point of fact, having heard her, she's good at what she does. She really is. I am told, if I remember correctly, that 17% of the Association for Jewish Studies, the organization of professors, are not Jewish. I can't vouch for that, but that's what I heard from one of their officers.
One more.
Well, it's not a question, it's just a comment about that. We had here in Buffalo, Senator Cory Booker, a few years ago, addressing a non-Jewish charities, annual thing, meeting, and he is a Talmudic scholar. He met a friend in England when he was studying, and he has become an expert in Jewish studies.
There you go. That addresses two of the topics, scholarship and ethnicity, right there.
If I could just add to that point real quick, my ex-wife's biblical Hebrew professor at Indiana University, his name is Ah-Seng Chu. Not Jewish, he's from Asia, always been fascinated with biblical Hebrew. And so he's just one of so many. So Professor Greenspan, many thanks on an enlightening talk. And again, he'll be around throughout this weekend for more presentations and also some casual conversation. On a personal note, I know Judy was a little bashful to mention this. Professor Greenspan happens to be my stepfather, and he is here with my mom, Barbara Pearl, and it is a personal pleasure to have them with me this weekend. So I am obviously very happy to have this weekend for numerous reasons as well. And I hope everyone enjoys getting to know Professor Greenspan and some of his observations. So Toda Rabbah. As we have studied words of Torah and words of Jewish thought, we all rise at this time for an extra Kaddish for those who have no one to say Kaddish for them. You can find it middle of page 24. We think of those who perished in the Holocaust, those who perished defending the state of Israel, those who've died of COVID-19, those in the line of fire in Ukraine. Again, middle of page 24. Yikadal v'yikadash shemeh rabba v'yalma divrak yiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael v'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmeh rabba mevorach le'alam u'lameh almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Please remain standing as we page 28 for the call to worship going into the Mariv service.
Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Be seated.
Umavi yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uvein laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo, el chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu li'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'ma'ariv aravim, ahavat olam, beit Yisrael, amecha Torah, mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limadeta, Al kein Adonai Eloheinu, b'shachbeinu v'kumeinu, nasiach b'chukecha, ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה. ואהבתך אל תוסי ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Adonai Elohechem emet.
Page 32.
ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל לך אנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ויאמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נהרת תהילה עושה פלא. מלכותך ראו בניך בוקע ים לפני משה, זה אלינו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Please rise, page 34.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל עוד היא לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעולמה דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בגולו בזמן הקרב יאמרו יהי שמי רבו מבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשא לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ויאמרו.
We recite individually the Amidah for Mariv for Shabbat, pages 35 through 38. When you've concluded your recitation, please remain standing. Feel free to continue if you're still reciting the Amidah. The service continues on page 47.
ויחולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם ויכל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה וישבות ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדש אותו כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות.
May be seated.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanara El Elyon Konei Shamayim Ba'aretz Magen Avot B'Devoro Mechaye Meitim B'Mamoro Ha'el HaKadosh She'en Kamohu Ha'meniach Le'amo B'Yom Shabbat Kodsho Kivam Ratza Lehaniach Lahem Kivam Ratza Lehaniach Lahem לפניו נעבור ביראה ופחד ונודה לשמו בכל יום תמיר מעין הברכות אל ההודעות אדון השלום מקדש השבת ומברך שביעי ומניח בקדושה לעמדו שני עונג זכר למעשה וראשית אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו רצה במנוחתנו קדשנו במצוותיך ותן חלקנו בתורתך סבנו מטובך ושמחנו בישועתך וטהר ליבנו לעבדך באמת והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון שבת קודשך וינוחו בישראל מקדשי שמך ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת יתגדל ויקרא שמי רבו, וילמד דברו חירותי, וימליך מלכותי, וחייכנו ויומכנו וחייך על בית ישראל, בגלו ובזמן הקרוב יאמרו, יהי שמי רבו מבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשו, לעילם מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן ביעלמה ואמרו, תתקבל צלותן ובאותן דכל ישראל, קדם אבוהן דבשמי ואמרו, יהי שלום רבו מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו, עושה שלום במרומו והוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו.
Amen. We rise for the Kiddush on page 49, followed by Aleinu on 51.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'ratzavanu, v'shabat kodsho, v'yahava u'v'ratzon, hinechilanu, zikaron lemase v'reishit, ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי באנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון, הנחלתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני. מקדש השבת. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולו ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, ביום יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
May be seated. For the upcoming week, we remember with love the archsites of Edith Abelson, Allison Albano Dandies, Constance Alfieri, David Becker, Isaac Blitz, Itzhak Blufstein, Stuart Brownstein, Samuel Chodorow, Henry Danziger, Erwin S. Davis, Bella De Bruin, Solomon Drozen, Richard E. Dwar, Charles Benjamin Farber, Esther Feinberg, Jack Franco, Bessie R. Friedman, Earl Friedman, David Fruit, Max Gazer, Joseph Gewurtzman, Goldie Glickstein, Samuel H. Gottlieb, Nicholas Isaacs, Sarah Kadish, Rosika Klein, Bernard Klein, Leah Noller, Sam Lefkowitz, Abraham Levine, Harry Levine, George Levy, Bizald Levy, Esther Milich, Fanny Mintz, Annette Ostroff, Anna Perlmutter, Rose Persky, Pearl Pickle, Regina Rappaport, Mary Rose, Mendel Sachs, Sarah Sarin, Ruben Shadchan, Esther Goldfarb Schwartz, Meyer Sirota, David Shatkin, Samuel Snap, Hyman Snyderman, Stanley Sobolewski, Doris Steinhardt, Maxim Sugorovsky, Gerda Windsor, Ruben Whitlieb, Bernard Wittenberg, and Ruth Zeberg. If there's anybody specific that you wish to remember by saying Kaddish, if you wish to rise and mention that person's name, feel free. And we invite anyone saying Kaddish, page 52, for those mourning, those observing yard site. We rise, Yikadal v'yikadash shemeh rabam, b'yalmad yivra kiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayeh dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru, amen. Yehei shmeh rabam mevorach le'alam u'lameh almaya, Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmeh dekudsha brichu la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. You may be seated. Call upon one of our VPs, Judy Davis, for announcements.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Professor and Barbara, we're very happy to have you here, both from the family perspective and the family perspective. Thank you. And I just wanted to mention that 2 weeks ago, when I was here, the trees behind me were barely budding. And now look at them. Our view has changed, and it's just so beautiful. I love to look at the seasons changing through those windows. So, as usual, we have a lot going on. The services for tomorrow, which will again feature Professor Grinspan, will be tomorrow morning beginning at 9:30 and then through the weekend as Rabbi described. He's going to talk in a moment about what will happen tomorrow for Havdalah. It's going to be different. Please realize that due to COVID concerns, the regular Kiddush will not be held, but we're going to have a tiny one tomorrow because of our honored guests. Rabbi has at least 4 learning opportunities available for all of us. You can read all about them on here. It seems as though there'd be something for everyone. We will have the Shavuot Tikkun on the weekend of June 4th and 5th, so that's coming up rather quickly. And there is also a Women's League virtual conference, which will be on Sunday, June 12th, and there's more information coming out on that and the rest of everything that's going on. You can read for yourselves. Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks much, Judy. So just regarding the rest of the weekend, it's a little, I forgot to make a change here, so I'm just going to explain that we are having tomorrow evening at 8 p.m., we're going to have Shabbat Mincha afternoon services, followed by the third of Professor Greenspan's talks, followed by Mariv, the evening service, and Havdalah. Havdalah will take place around 9:20 p.m., and it will be live streamed instead of on Zoom like we normally do, or like we've been doing Havdalah since the pandemic began. So this will be a little different, but hopefully an opportunity for you to come in person for Shabbat afternoon and evening services at the end of Shabbat, or to, of course, watch through live stream. Also, Sunday morning, we'll be doing morning minyan in here, and that will be on live stream as instead of Zoom, so that we may have the fourth of Professor Greenspan's talk. So those are things that will be a little different this weekend. I do hope that whether you're here in person, whether you're watching on live stream, hopefully you will be able to be here and or tune in to following talks, to the remaining talks and to upcoming services throughout this weekend. As always, Toda Rabah Yasher Koach to Cantor Spindler for leading us in davening. We will conclude this evening with Adon Olam, page 54.
Adon Olam, Asher Molach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa, V'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Adon Olam, Asher Molach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa, V'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Ve'acharei Kichlot HaKol, Levado Yimloch Nora, Vehu haya, vehu hove, vehu yeh b'tifara, Adon Olam Asher Molach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa v'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Vehu Echad, Ve'ein Sheni, Lahamshilo Lehachbira, B'li Reshit, B'li Tachlit, V'lo ha'oz ve'ha'misra, Adon Olam Asher Molach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa v'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Vehu Eli, V'chai Goali, V'tzurchev li Be'et Tzara, Vehu Nisi, Yumanos li, Menot Kosi Be'yom Ekra, Adon Olam Asher Molach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa v'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, Beyado Avkid Ruchi, Be'eri Shana Ve'a'ira, V'yimruchi Geviyati, Adon Oli Ve'lo Ira, Adon Olam Asher Molach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'et Nasa v'chefzo Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra. Shabbat Shalom.
You look so beautiful. Great colors on all of you. I told your husband, I love your posts. I look forward to reading your posts every day. You make me smile. Literally every day.
Yeah, that's it.
That's right. Well, we're just doing this to impress Professor Greenspan. It's like this all the time here. It's all just
So, Taylor, so glad you could be here. So glad. Appreciate it.
Professor Greenspan, this is my daughter, Taylor. She has the honor of being the first special needs child to be baptized. And she always does that. Taylor's our
Go up, very nice. Good.
We spent half a year taking one course of them.
Oh, the Shabbos. The Shabbos again? The Shabbos?
It was so nice to see you. When did you come?
We got back last Wednesday.
Oh, last Thursday?
Yes.
Actually, I came last Tuesday.
So you were in Florida too?
Many times, many times.